I've always been pretty interested in Metroidvanias. I know it's a term that isn't really fully defined, a lot of people have their own opinions of it, but I love a lot of games that fall under that umbrella. But it did take until recently for me to actually play more of these games, instead of just appreciate them at passing. As of right now, that's mostly been Castlevania. After absolutely adoring Symphony of the Night, and even playing Bloodstained recently, I grabbed the Game Boy Advance and DS collection on Steam, and I've been playing those games in release order alongside the PlayStation releases. Though I haven't gotten around to all of them since, and despite some of the shortcomings of some of the games, I always love the feeling in them regardless. The Castlevania theory. The goth fantasy aesthetic of the series has always really appealed to me, especially the art in the more recent games. But regardless of that, the gameplay loop is just something that's always enticed me, regardless of the series or the game. There are plenty of games, both in the series and out of it, that I really owe myself to check out. I'm almost completely blind to the Metroid side of things right now, and I really want to play Fusion, but I at least gotta finish Dawn of Sorrow first. Another thing I love about just games in general really, including Metroidvanias, is movement. Now, given movement's more or less a fundamental aspect of any game and how you interact, of course it's important. And while there's certainly wrong ways to do it, there really is no correct way to do movement, in any kind of game really. Even movement that might seem slow or unfun can exist for all sorts of purposes. Aesthetics, balancing, but man, when a game has intense and satisfying movement options, I could just be a real sucker for it. I've been rocket jumping for 10 years now and I've never not had fun with it. And I still suck at it! If the act of moving is just as fun as actually what you're meant to be doing in the game, then you're probably doing something right. Especially for me, because I'm probably gonna like it. Metroidvanias have always had their hands in the bucket of movement. I mean, both of the foundational series were kind of platformers at the start, and they still are 2D side-scrollers that kind of incorporate platforming. A lot of abilities and unlocks are tied to movement too. Screw attack, slide, double jumps, high jumps. So needless to say, movement has always been a bit important in these games. Only one game, though, that I've played has managed to capture and retain that spirit of exploration that I love from Metroidvanias, while also opening up the world and allowing the player such freedom of movement that I've come back to the game time and time again. Pseudoregalia, a game made mostly by a single developer, released in 2023. If you've heard of it, there's a good chance it's about the same movement I'm gonna praise. Or, maybe for other reasons. I know a lot of what I'm gonna say probably won't be that groundbreaking, nor am I really saying in any timely manner, but I don't care. This game just managed to strike such a perfect balance of all the things I love into a package that kept me wanting more, even after I beat it several times over. Don't take this as like a professional review or a super deep analysis of the game. I'm still kind of figuring out this YouTube thing. Just take this as a recommendation and a love letter. I want to talk about a game I really like. Well then, what does it do so good? Well, let me start with one of the first things that's going to jump out at you. I've already alluded to the fact that movement is one of this game's strongest aspects, but I think it's really important to highlight the fact that this movement exists in 3D, which is not something you see a lot in Metroidvanias. I mean, there are 3D Metroidvanias. A lot, honestly, depending on who you ask and what your definition is, but that's kind of the issue. I alluded to the fact earlier that Metroidvania is kind of a loose label. To some, it's a full-on genre, to others it's a subgenre. My point being that generally, there isn't much of an idea for a 3D Metroidvania as there is for 2D. And of course, that makes sense. Not every idea that works or is good in a 2D game might necessarily translate over to a 3D game without some changes, and that's usually where the points of disagreement and the wide variety of opinions for what a 3D Metroidvania is come from. For some, a lot of games tend to fall under the label. To them, it's more a description of how a game's exploration is handled. It's pretty broad. A lot of games you wouldn't expect can fall under this label, like Dark Souls or Batman Arkham Asylum. On the flip side, you have much more conservative definitions that require very specific traits to be present. It's these definitions that tend to make these games more about being a very specific genre, to the point where even games within franchises that already are considered Metroidvanias, such as Metroid and Castlevania, are excluded because they stray too far from the idea in people's eyes. It makes sense, considering some of the early Castlevanias don't even fall under this label either. But some people argue over if a game like Metroid Prime can even be considered Metroidvania, since it takes a first-person perspective, or if the more action-heavy Lords of Shadow Castlevania games can be considered Metroidvanias either. I don't say this to really take a stance on the matter. I say it because, to me, I think Pseudoregalia is one of the prime examples of a game doing all that Metroidvania should in 3D, in the idea of exploring an interconnected world. I'm sure some might still disagree, but to me this feels like a game that really takes all the aspects of a 2D Metroidvania and just puts it in 3D. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. It takes the essence of these games and translates it to 3D. And well, of course it's not perfect. It's definitely not as long as your standard Vania, and I think depending on what series you're coming from, it might be missing features you like, such as not having the item system that Castlevania has. But I feel like it takes the baseline of what's there, what's the most satisfying about these games, and translates it super well. Which is really great, because I feel like you don't find a lot of Metroidvanias like this. Even the pioneers tend to be more innovative. And while there's nothing wrong with that, it certainly created different experiences. Pseudoregalia feels like it captures the platforming origins a bit more, in a way that delights seasoned fans, but will also let people who just want a damn good platformer enjoy the game too. The third-person perspective combined with the fluid and loose controls you have just really beckon you to go and explore. Combine that with all the abilities you have and it really just makes you want to keep going until you just can't explore anymore. Just keep going until you hit a dead end. Yet something great about this game is that unlike a lot of other Metroidvanias, it doesn't feel like when you hit a dead end, you necessarily need to come back with a certain item. It's very non-linear. Of course, there's a lot of areas that are intended with a certain item in mind, and a few where, realistically, there is no option but to get the one item you need. But for the most part, you really get your mileage out of your abilities. Once you leave the first area, you can get any ability in any order, and they all feel like real additions. Very few are ones that just kind of get added and used for one or two situations. It's really non-linear. Once it starts, the only things that you really need to do is just collect the keys to get to the final boss. There's nothing that forces you to get one ability in a set order, or even to have to get any ability at all. Though that's not to say you shouldn't. Some are kinda necessary. The game really leans on its platforming side to do what many greats of that genre do, which is lay out a strong toolkit for your character and tells you that there isn't one correct answer to get to the end. Just that you're at point A, and you have to get to point B, and there might be some things on the way from point A to point B that you might want to get. And this aspect of the platformer just really gels well with the sense of momentum you want in a Vania, that want to keep going and to find everything you can in your path until there's nowhere else to go, nothing else to do. The non-linearity in the game just encourages that sense that you want to keep exploring so well. It took what I thought was one of the most interesting ideas Lament of Innocence had, giving you a bunch of areas that you could really go in any order, as long as you just get the key items you need from them. It avoids that game's biggest pitfall though, where all the areas just felt separate and unconnected in a way that just made them feel unsatisfying. In that game, they were almost just like separate levels in any other video game, but Pseudoregalia, it all feels really interconnected. The areas flow into one another in a really good way. This game also doesn't make another mistake Lament of Innocence makes, which is making you fight another final boss after the already very difficult final boss. Oh, and I guess it does some other things good that game didn't really do so well. Like, backtracking. It's one of those things that's kind of an icky buzzword to a lot of people. A lot would tell you that they just hate it in games in general, but I think, like with grinding, it tends to be more of an issue only if you really feel it. If it just feels like you're playing more of the game you like, then it's awesome. But if you really stop and think, oh man, I have to backtrack, then that's when it's kind of a problem. Vanias in general do tend to employ a lot of backtracking, what with one of the cores of the games being that you come back to areas when you have more abilities. And I guess that's also true of some platformers. In tighter designed ones, you feel it a lot less. But there almost always tends to come a point when you realize, yeah, you have to backtrack. In Pseudoregalia, you never really have the time or the desire to feel it as a negative thing. The movement is just so tightly woven into the game itself and is such an inherently satisfying thing that you just want to move more. Backtracking is just another type of movement you're doing. Let me actually talk about that movement, because I've gotten this far and yet I haven't actually explained a lot of Sybil's abilities. Oh yeah, Sybil is the name of the character you play, I'll talk about her later. In total, you get 10 abilities across the game, but only 6 of them actually have a meaningful impact on how you move. The rest are for puzzles or for combat. Those main movement-based abilities are a jump kick, which you can repeat 3 times, 4 if you get a later unlock, a slide jump, a ground slam, and a wall ride. The first 2 are the ones that you're going to end up using most often, as they're an easy way for you to build up a huge amount of momentum very quickly. Not to mention, the slide jump just feels really satisfying to pull off, at least to me, even if it does kind of hurt to do after a while. There is a slightly faster way to move though, which is by doing a regular jump right after you land from a slide jump. This maintains a lot of the momentum you already had, and if you move forward you can go really fast. It can be a bit tricky to land though. Once I got the hang of repeatedly bunny hopping like this, bunny, it became my main way of moving across the castle. Having the option to repeatedly do the simpler slide jump over and over, or to try for the slightly more difficult but ultimately more rewarding bunny hops, already made the backtracking in the game feel a lot better. It's what really helped to engage me in what would be lower moments in other Vanias like this. And that's not even mentioning the other abilities you have. The mid-air wall kick is probably your second most versatile ability, and that's not just for the actual ability to bounce off of a wall. The little mid-air kick you do grants you a little bit more momentum that might be necessary to close out a jump, cross a gap, or just give you a little more control in the air. Admittedly, I don't really feel like I've wrapped my head around exactly how it works. I think the actual bounce itself might be one of the more frustrating and less satisfying aspects of the game's design, but that also just could be a skill issue. The angle it sends you at does take a lot of adjustment. The ground slam's about what you expect. Slams you to the ground. It can be good for stopping your momentum, and there's a little window where you just stop in the air, but don't necessarily go down, which can be nice to get a little extra jump in. The wall ride's kind of situational, but probably one of my favorite abilities. I mean, just being able to slide across the wall is pretty strong. I don't think I need to explain that much. It can also offer a nice little breather for you to plan what your next action's going to be while you're out on the wall. The last ability, which I failed to mention earlier, is Ascendant Light, which basically just lets you bounce up when you hit an enemy with your sword. It's not as versatile as other ones just because enemies aren't everywhere, but it can be very useful. Once you start to feel out the area and know where enemies will and won't spawn, you can squeeze it into your movement for some pretty cool moves. Speaking of your sword, you can throw the sword, and you can kick the sword. Is this practical? Not really at all. Have I ever landed it? Fuck no! But it's cool! And speaking of cool, this game's presentation. Yeah, it uses a lot of cool colors. Let's talk about it! Well, Pseudoregalia already is a game that builds upon the legacy of much of what came before. Graphics are probably one of the places this game most wears its inspirations on its sleeve. And for me, well, I really like it. You can call the style generic, overdone, lazy, or whatever. I can agree the 5th generation throwback style is kinda getting a bit overplayed now. But I think like pixel art, it's one of those things that's also just commodifying itself into its own style completely. I think it's on how it's actually done. Sure, it could be a lazy nostalgia pandering style or just downright generic, but like pixel art too, it can not only be done really well in its own way, but can also show how these limited styles can actually be more impressive in some ways than realistic and typically impressive styles. I don't know, I'm sure you've all heard by now how only having enough polygons to count on your fingers can leave more room to interpretation and make something seem more visually impressive or even more scary or unsettling than the crazy hyper-realism we see in modern impressive games today. Or how those said games will probably age worse as we get closer and closer to realism. Or how Red Dead Redemption 2 may have a record for its ratio of unnecessarily realistic details that exactly 12 people will ever actually see, the developers' souls crushed as they spend an entire work week away from their family. So yeah, I think Pseudoregalia looks great. Full disclosure though, I am a PS1 kid. I grew up with a lot of Apis games and Spyro the Dragon. I bet you couldn't tell either of those things by any aspects of this video at all. Admittedly though, I'm not really sure if Pseudoregalia is going specifically for a PS1 look or more of an N64 look, but regardless of what it's going for, I really like it. Effects like the torches I've heard compared to Zelda, but the more ethereal and dreamlike aesthetic of the game really just reminds me of the PS1's catalog. Either way, I really like what the game has going for it. While it just looks good on its own, I really like the throwback aspect of it too. The filter and the animation framerate lock both do a nice job of really stylizing the game a bit more, and it really shows that even though the graphics are lower quality, it doesn't necessarily mean they're lower effort. They're executed very well, even if they are made to be intentionally simpler. It all adds up and creates a really strong atmosphere, which is honestly probably one of my favorite parts about this game's whole presentation. Like I said earlier, it is a very dreamlike and ethereal vibe. But also, and something that took me a couple playthroughs to really notice, the game also just feels kinda claustrophobic. Even in the Bailey, my favorite area, and the one that seems to be outdoors, the skybox still just kinda makes you feel enclosed. It kinda looks like a cavern or something. It feels illogical, but it's kinda all-encompassing. I remember once when I was talking with somebody while playing the game, I just took a moment at the tower remains to stare out at the skybox, which is the same as the Bailey's, and I just kinda stared at it. I was looking out at this just vast sea of purple shards? It resembled a cavern. Something about that moment really resonated with me. I just kind of sat there and thought, maybe it's a brain, maybe it's a cave, I don't know what to make of it. But the crazy part, in taking another look there for the recording of this footage, I noticed that the skybox is even more animated than I thought it was. The purple parts kind of pulled back and revealed this night sky that I didn't even notice was there. It reminded me of the title screen and it kind of blew me away for a second, especially the fact that I even missed it in the first place. Kind of made me feel like freedom is just out of reach. It's a vast sky beyond these castle walls, but they're just out of reach until you beat the final boss. Okay, I know I'm playing it up a bit, but it was a really nice little moment. Seeing this just made me even more interested in the otherwise claustrophobic atmosphere of the rest of the game. There's more examples like the Underbelly, which is a cavern that just feels primed to have the weight of the castle collapse upon it one of these days. Even the theater, with its giant stage and some outdoor areas, it doesn't do enough to really break that feeling that you're kind of trapped. It does a good job of really being present despite not being something that's going to hit you right in the face. Now something that is in your face though, Sybil! She's cool. I like her design. I feel like she's a really good representation of the game's mixing of fantasy elements and the platformer inspiration. I feel like her overall vibe is a nice blending of fantastical fantasy race design and the mascot aesthetic a lot of platformers of the era the game was inspired off had. Like, she's RPG adjacent, but more Final Fantasy IX than Final Fantasy 8 or 7. Her softer animal elements and the humanoid proportions and detail outfit all kind of come together to work really well, I think. Especially with maxed out upgrades, the gold you get really adds some nice color to her design. Her lack of pants is often pointed out and, well, oh boy. Yeah, she has a respectable leg game, let's say. I get that, especially with the way that the game is in third person, so you're kind of always looking at the behind, and the general design, meaning that the legs kind of stand out. Yeah, I'll stop beating around the bush. You can kind of tell the developer had an intention with the design, but like, I don't think it's that big a deal. Like, okay, I know maybe me talking about it like this isn't helping that, but like, it's one thing if you're just not particularly fond of sexualization in games in general. Like, if you don't like My Shiranui or someone, I get that. But like, people blow up Sybil even more, like it's something really crazy, and like, I know why that is. She's like a furry, so it's like weird and different now, I guess, even though most of us have been on the internet for like 10 plus years now. We all know what furries are. Like, I guess I get it that it's like, there's not a lot of games that are mainstream that have furries like this, but like I see people treat this game like it gets extra praise because it's got a furry character, or like they write it off because like it's a furry game, and I'm like, come on. I get it if that's just like not your cup of tea, like that's fine, but I feel like with some people it's like they have to always make it out to be like this huge thing. Like a game just can't have like an anthro character anymore, because it's like the second you do, people are just gonna like be weirdly obsessive about the fact that like furries exist and they're like a known subculture now, so people are gonna be like, oh, it's a furry thing. Like furries are like the secret like cult that's like putting animals in two legs and everything. Like, this isn't just something that people have done in fiction forever. Like, okay, this is an aside, I know I'm yapping at this point, but like, why has this suddenly become a big deal now that people just like know what a furry is? I understand that she may be attracted to some, and having like an anthro character with that kind of design is like not something you see often. Like, I'm not trying to shame people who just don't like it, like that's fine, but there's like people that are like weirder about not liking it than like any actual furry would be about this stuff. Then again, I know people did kind of go crazy for her design. Like, even now, you gotta be kind of careful when you Google her. But like, man, I just hate when I hear people say that something like that is what stops them from trying out a game. None of that has to do with how good the game actually is. I think Sybil's a good design, even despite of all of that, but even if you don't want to agree with me, that shouldn't stop you from playing a cool game. If you've come this far in this video, I'm sure you're not like that, and you probably wouldn't let that stop you from playing the game, but like, I feel like there's people like that now, with just things in general. It's like, they have to put a game in a box and be like, oh, I can't play that, that's like, that kind of game, like, oh, that's a weeb game, that's like a this or that game, like, come on. Furries, in this case, just being the topically relevant one, but I think it's one that comes up sometimes. Like, do you think there's someone out there that's like, they will play Sonic because they're animals? It's like, that's a furry game, I can't play that. Like, God forbid you show these guys Bloody Roar. I'm sorry you just had to be subjected to that. Like, dude, could you imagine actually being a furry? Could've been me. Thankfully, though, if you're not a big fan of big butts, you have... If you're not really fond of that, there is 100% serious an accessibility option to give her pants. And some other outfits you unlock later, but I'll get into that later. With all of that said, I do really like Sybil's design. She reminds me a lot of Klonoa in a lot of ways, actually, which is a really good thing. Klonoa also kind of makes a lot of fantasy elements in his world, so it kind of makes sense. Both are also Cabots. Well, I think Sybil's also part goat. Both of them also have a lot to do with dreams, though, which I didn't even realize until I was writing this. Guess if I had a nickel for every really good dream-based platformer with a cabbed protagonist, I'd have 2 nickels. Now, sadly, unlike Klonoa, Pseudoregalia's story isn't just unexpectedly like the greatest thing ever. Go play Klonoa. It just kind of exists. A lot like the aesthetics, in a lot of ways, I think its best strength is just leaving some stuff up for interpretation. I won't really spoil anything, because a lot of the intent with this video is to try and get people who haven't played the game to try it out, but there's not a lot. But there are a lot of outfits! You can get these outfits by doing time trials across the castle. Some of them are not that great. I only really recommend doing it if you really want to play more of the game, or if you're just interested in checking them all out. My favorite one is probably the knight armor. That's in part because it has me ask a lot of questions about the game's story. That, but I'm also just a sucker for armor designs, especially on female characters. Get the outfit in the Bailey, and being outside of the castle, it already makes you think it has to do with something like a barracks or something stationed outside. It kind of makes you question, this is a castle. and there's a princess. Are the enemies we're fighting the knights that have always been guarding this castle, or was there another force protecting the castle before the enemies we see in the game? The game also does just toy around with its dreamlike setting to the point where it might just be a dream. Nothing might be real, so it could really just mean nothing, but even if it's a bonus costume, it makes you think things, and that's fun. I like thinking. There's an outfit for every area, so hopefully there's something to your tastes. Some of them up the aforementioned appeal, if that's your interest. But it's a nice little bonus. I always enjoy when games give you customization options like this. And like I said, some of the designs push the fantastical elements again, which might have you question more about the world and the story. But that's actually one thing I do have a bit of an issue with in the game. I mentioned earlier the whole might be in a dream thing, and I think the game is. But I just kinda wish the game pushed more of the weirdness of that. There's exactly one room that kinda does that, and that's it. I mean, I didn't even know what the room was going for at first. I almost just kind of glanced it over. When I realized, I thought there was some kind of secret or something I missed. Now, if they did go too far in that direction, I could see how maybe the vibe could be messed up. It could very easily go from a slight, arguably not even really horror, but definitely off and kind of unsettling vibe, to just downright trying too hard to be creepy. Basically, what happened to the back rooms. And I don't want them to remove the subtle aspect of it, but I just wish there was a little bit more. Maybe another room or two that was weird like this, maybe some RNG chance event that just adds a blink and you'll miss it weird moment. Something to really imply that reality like this is just messed up. But then again, I am just kind of nitpicking. Knowing this game was made for a game jam first, and only got a couple more months of development tacked on, I can understand why a detail like that might have been something that they just wanted to leave as one and done. And honestly, I think that's what I love about this game so much. It's just one small, tight package made uniquely by one person. It's not unique in the sense that it's an indie game that really comes from only one person. We've had many of those for years now. But like all of them, it's unique in the sense that it is that one person's vision. Everybody and their mom has said it at some point, but it really can't be understated just how great indie games are for this very purpose. One person or small teams can just come together and make something that they just want to make. They don't have to concede to any kind of trends or expectations of investors, they just do what they want. That's not to say there aren't uninspired indie games. I'm sure there's dime a dozen Metroidvanias out there, just playing it safe knowing that it's a genre that's already pretty big in the indie scene. Development tools being more accessible means just as much that these passionate and inspired indie devs who want to make something they love can make games just as much as someone who just wants to make a quick buck copying Five Nights at Freddy's or Dark Souls. I wonder if someone's trying combining both of them. That would probably be awful. Anyways, in an industry where we see games increasingly trying to maximize the amount of people they appeal to and the amount of time that you're supposed to spend on them, it's really nice to have these little indie games that just take one or two ideas and just run with them, as opposed to trying to be everything and do everything and basically be a job. I actually found Pseudoregalia's developer before the game came out. I used to follow them, Ritzler they're called, sorry if I mispronounced that, on Twitter. I didn't really follow them deeply, but I saw that they were making another platformer that looked pretty good with an equally curvy robot girl. Anyways, it was inspiring seeing the work they had done. This already really fleshed out character and moveset, running around untextured dev playgrounds, but looking really fun. It really inspired me, especially at the time when I had my own ideas of a platformer game that I wanted to make, which never came to fruition. Maybe one day. It definitely got me a little more interested when I realized Pseudoregalia was their work. The game just looked interesting to me as is, but realizing it was the same person that already had me interested in their old movement made me wonder what they actually did in a fully complete product. And well, I think I spent the last 20 minutes explaining why I'm pretty happy with it. I'm really glad that Ritzler succeeded with this game. It might not be any Undertale now, but it's got a pretty dedicated following, and I think a lot of people are pretty excited to see what Ritzler's next game is going to be. I'm looking forward to it, even if it's not going to be like Pseudoregalia. Apparently it's supposed to be a roguelike platformer, which I don't think I trust a lot of developers with, but I think Ritzler's one of the few that I can trust to pull it off. And I'm already addicted enough to Risk of Rain 2. I can't imagine what a roguelike with movement like Pseudoregalia would do to me. And if you haven't played Pseudoregalia yet, well, try it out! If my yapping and my 30 hours in the game, over 4 finished playthroughs and 1 ongoing one aren't enough, maybe mentioning the price tag is only $6 would probably help. That's basically $1 for an hour, if you only play the game once. And there's also the soundtrack, which I didn't get to mention to the aesthetics, but it's pretty good. A lot of it is more atmospheric and not stuff you're going to listen to on its own, but it does a good job for setting the mood of the game. But the highlights are great. Outside the Castle Walls is probably my favorite song, just for the energy it's got. The first boss theme, The Fiercely Loyal, is honestly what got me to even buy the game. The piano is crazy, and I don't think I could do the final boss theme justice. You just gotta listen to it. Boss fights are probably some of the weaker points of the game, but you don't even notice just because the music's that good. So, well, what are you waiting for? It's on Steam. If you have the spare cash, just need a game to play, I really would highly recommend it. If you're a fan of Metroidvanias, you're a fan of platformers, or you don't really play either and you just think the game looks neat, by all means, I really recommend you try it out. It's one of my favorite games in the last few years. And hopefully it can become a favorite for you too. And if you're really afraid of the legs, you can turn on the pants option.
How about that prick's face when he saw the gat?